and we try to do our best to save the planet. And then we come into the lab, into our working conditions every morning, and think, oh, that's not a different world. And in the evening in the lab, we believe, oh, that's not a good view if we look on all these.
So sorry, Jan, can I just stop you there? I think some of people on the call are having some issues with the sound. I don't really know how to. Sarah, do you have any suggestions? I don't know if it's, can everybody hear me okay? Is it?
If I may, I've logged off and on, and I closed and got back on the call, and it worked.
Okay. Could maybe the people who are having issues try that and then let us know in the chat if that's resolved it for you.
Thank you, so sorry.
We're still in the introduction, so you do not miss the real details. So we still have 1 or 2 minutes until we really start with the content. So what I just wanted to start to say is, well, when we end up our daily work time in the lab, we just realize how much plastic waste we created. So that is something which is kind of a nightmare, I think, for most of us. And we just think, okay, what can we do to improve this? And actually, in my former tasks here at Eppendorf, I worked a lot for the freezer team. And, for the freezers, that was always like, yeah, cooling liquids, power consumption. That was always a topic. And then we decided, okay, we have to broaden it up to all the other products. And for sure, plastic is the major topic. I think when I check all the questions we got from the field, I think every second question is really regarding plastic in the lab. To cut it short, we cannot do without plastic. I will come to that later on, but that's really one of the key essentials of this talk. We do have the focus on the plastic topic, and depending on your questions on the timing, I still have a little bit as an add-on about power consumptions in the lab, so some tips and tricks. We'll see how far we can come. We will come in this session. So then we will start now by using, come on, the next slide. So I think what I just described is visible pretty much on this slide. So you see this waste, and I think every one of you is somehow recognizing one of these statements like, well, the waste, it's good that this guy is always cleaning up in the evening and the lab is empty and clean in the morning. Oh, that's not my problem anymore because it's turned away, it's brought away. We should use less. We should think twice. So these are topics which are kind of bother us at every day. And we have to see what we can do. So when we start about thinking about sustainability for sure as a company, you always start like, oh, what can we do on our own? And that's what most of the companies do. So just to give you an example, I mean, we switched all our factories to 100% green energy, to renewable energy, to lower our carbon footprint. We try to compensate for the gas. We are located in Hamburg with most of our facilities, so that means it's not cold. It's similar to the UK, but you need some heating in the wintertime. So that means there's no way to save gas. You have to use it somehow. In the long time period, you can replace your heating systems to heat pumps, but that takes time and money. Regarding our carbon footprints, we said already a few years ago, yeah, let's try to reduce. And honestly, we were a little bit naive at that time point, also at Eppendorf, thinking, yes, we can just reduce our emissions pretty easy. So by switching the energy supply, by doing some car replacements for the sales folks, job done. Well, actually, if we face it, you see here we reduced our direct emissions. So they're scope 1 and 2. So what we are directly responsible for by 58% in these 3 years, which was already impressive, but still now all the hard facts will start. On the other side, we decided to join SBTi, so the Science-Based Target Initiative. That's a global initiative to, I would say, force the companies to behave in a better way. And that is addressing scope 1, 2, 3, so all different kinds of emissions, even those emissions on your side, on the user side, which is actually difficult to influence because, we cannot force you to stop using the centrifuge or the incubator. But anyway, so there we do have now some goals like reducing another 60 or 63% of our emissions completely. So we do have now at Eppendorf 2 different, calculation methods, and we have in the midterm, we have to merge them because we have expanded our goals, period, for that one. You see, that is okay, nice that this guy is talking about that and that Eppendorf is doing something, but what's in for me in the lab? Therefore, I would like to skip or to stop now talking about Eppendorf and what we did as a company, or that our CEO is driving whatever car. That doesn't make a difference for you folks in the labs. What's interesting? Interesting is what you can do locally. And for that one, question number one is really, how can you reduce the waste load in your lab? And that's really important. Why is that? Pretty simple. We are all aware, and I told you, or Sarah told you, I'm in the marketing team, so I'm a great fan of all these lovely glory pictures. Everything's clean. You know that from brochures, from the flyers, from the websites, from any kind of supplier. No single trace of waste. And actually, reality looks in the evening like this. And I can tell you, when we started this kind of talks at Eppendorf 3 years ago, we do have some kind of database with, I think, 10,000 images of different products. And there was not a single image of waste. So even at Eppendorf, this topic did not exist before. So we had to ask some professional colleagues to make photos to really show also waste. So you see, it's not limited to you. It's also in our situation. We have to learn, we have to accept, we have to discover new areas, which includes our business. That means really including the waste question. So when we look on plastic in the lab, we have pretty much 3 steps. So one is the raw material, which you see on the left. We have options to reduce. That's where we'll start with the discussion now. And then there's a question about recycling. But let's get started with what can you do today in the lab, in your team, in your laboratory. Rule number 1 is lab waste is expensive. Why is that? Because it's contaminated waste, and all the waste companies are resource-saving companies, however you call them in a political way, in a positive way nowadays. They are business makers. So they compare the business or the office waste with the lab waste and just realize, hey, big business, just double or triple the price. So when you talk to your waste management in your institution, they will just tell you the real price. It's really expensive. So the goal is, how can you reduce it? And the golden rule is really, do you really need all the material in the lab? So that means if you get a new package of a pipette, of some consumables, do you really need to bring the cardboard box into the laboratory? Because then officially it's contaminated waste. If you keep it outside, that means you unpack your new holy glory pipette or whatever you just ordered in your office, because it's still clean, you can do that. Keep all the packaging there and go to the lab. You can transfer all this packaging material to the normal recycling bins, and it can be recycled without any issue. It does not need to be incinerated. There's no need for special treatment. It's clean. When we look on the different parts or products in the lab, all these cardboards, they do not need to enter the lab. No need, absolutely no request to do it. For sure, you should not take out all the tips out of a bag of tips, so some bulkware, just to save the plastic foil outside the lab, because that does not make sense. Also, if the packaging is guaranteeing sterility, it does not make sense to remove the packaging outside the biosafety cabinet or your chemical hood or wherever you're using that one. But always check, what can you separate, what can you really leave outside the lab, because then you can provide it to the classic recycling process without having any kind of bad feeling. On the lower side of this slide, you see these bags of bulkware. And there actually we do have to fulfill some homework at Eppendorf, but also at other companies, because these materials, these bags, are made of composite materials. So there are 2 or even 3 plastic materials, polymers, glued together in a way that is needed, currently still needed, to guarantee sterility. But these composite materials cannot be recycled, so independent from the status of contamination. So that's something where we have to do something on our side, and that's ongoing, so we are working on this one. Then the question is, how many tips do you need in the lab if you do an experiment? You know, we all learned in the lab in the past, think first, act second, which makes sense anyway in science, but here especially about using consumables. So, for example, we do have here an example of how many are there? 8 samples and 4 reagents, or vice versa, never mind. And if you do one tip by a step, you end up with 40 tips. If you use a master mix and you think before, you could end up with 13 tips and one little tube. So saving already plastic. Then the question is, which kind of tube formats do you use in the lab? I think we all grew up with the knowledge about 15 and 50 milliliter tubes, so the big conical tubes. And quite often, you just had something like 20 milliliter, which is far too much for the 15, if we're honest, and which is just a very small volume in the 50 milliliter conical tube. In the meantime, there are so many suppliers of, let's say, other subversions, so 5 milliliter, 25 milliliter, 30 milliliter vessels. So it makes sense to think about if you could switch to other formats as well, because you see in the text paragraph on the left, you save just from 15 to 5 milliliter tubes, conical tubes, you can save 30% of plastic or even 50% of plastic just by switching the format. Another aspect is you have more space in your freezer because these smaller tubes require less space. So that means you can put in 60 or even double, 60% or even double the number of tubes in your freezer. That saves electricity, that saves another investment into a second freezer, so it's a win-win-win situation. For sure, this tip will not work for all experiments in every situation, but it's something which may trigger your mind like, oh, yeah, this time I should not take the big tube, but take an adequate tube size or tube volume. Regarding the tip boxes, there's another story to tell. I mean, I hope most of you are already using the reload or refill systems, what we see on the right side. So there are 2 options to use tip boxes. On the left side, you see the single-use boxes which we throw away, which we still have in our portfolio, but we would like to push the users towards the right side. We already reduced the amount of plastic for these boxes by 20% in the last years, but it's still a lot of plastic you just use once. So please, whenever it's possible, go to the reload system. And independent from the supplier of tips you're using, pretty much all the suppliers, if it's Greiner, if it's Starstedt, if it's Thermo, if it's Avantor, if it's Eppendorf, you name it, we all have reload systems. And you can use them 90, 100, 110 times, again and again, just refilling, autoclaving in them, and you save more than 50% of plastic without having any limitations in your comfort, in your sample safety, in the handling efforts. So just saving plastics. It's pretty easy. So those were tips and tricks you can take just in your lab. I mean, it wasn't rocket science. It was just very obvious things. You just need to keep it in mind. Oh, yeah, there I can save a little bit of plastic. What other options are on the table? Actually, when we look on material for consumables, we are, in the moment, we are just centered on the oil-based raw materials. So that means the classic plastic we all grew up with, we all know by heart. When we talk about what are alternatives, what kind of alternatives do we have? There are some people saying, hey, the good old times with having glass. Wait a second. Good old times and glass? I mean, I used glass a little bit in my university times, and that was just always like, it was heavy, it was expensive, it was easy to break. My boss was always standing behind me, like, take care of this cuvette, it's super expensive. And if we look on the production side, the production of glass is far more energy intensive than any plastic. So that is not really an option. If we look on the right side, we see the question about recycling material, biodegradable polymers to reduce the waste load, or any kind of bio-based polymers. Biodegradation, yes, that would be great. Huh? You just take your tubes with you going to home in the evening. You throw your used tubes in the garden on this pile of compost, and after half a year they are gone. Or wait, it's lab waste, it's contaminated. So biodegradation does not work at all. Plus, how does biodegradation works? Little microbes use enzymes, use pH changes to degenerate the plastic. Bad luck. That's exactly the same stuff we do in the lab. We use enzymes, we use different pH values. So what would work in the garden would also work in the lab. So that is not a good way. Besides, there's a strong tendency to have a closed loop so that we keep this material. And biodegradation is pretty much the same than incineration. It's just a long-term process. The material is gone, it's ending up as CO2. So what else do we have? We have bio-based polymers. And that is something we will come to as well. But first of all, I would like to have another story about recycling, because that's quite often a question as well. Like, hey, why can't we send back all our tubes we just used to Eppendorf and you make new tubes out of this? Yes, that's a great concept, great idea. But there's an issue. Let's face it. All this waste, I mean, you know what you do in the lab, but we don't know. And there are tons of labs worldwide, and everyone's working with different styles, different protocols, different reagents, different chemical stuff. So it's a broad mixture of all different kinds of biological and chemical materials included in the tubes, tips, and plates. It's a lot of different plastics, because even polypropylene is not polypropylene. There are different subversions. If you mix them, you get lower quality of plastic. But the bigger challenge is really, in most countries, institutions, waste from the lab must be incinerated, so by law. So we cannot just reuse them, because it's by law, by definition, contaminated waste. Plus, in a lot of recycling facilities, the recycling of plastic ends up in a so-called downcycling. So we end up with lower grade of plastics, which are less quality. But still, we have to do something. So this is not an excuse to do nothing, first of all. So what we are currently checking, and I know that a couple of different companies already offer this service, is to collect at least the tip boxes, the single-use polypropylene-based tip boxes, to bring them back into some recycling loop. That is a concept we have to fulfill in the near future, for sure. Currently, at least our experience is, it's difficult to find partners in the recycling companies where we can really be sure that this will not end up somewhere in Eastern Europe in the landscape. Plus, the problem is our community, the lab community, is far too small. When we say, well, we have already tons of material available, these recycling guys just tell you, do you mean per hour or per minute? Because their scaling is far bigger. So they're talking about hundreds and thousands of tons per day. And then the lab community is knocking on the door saying, hey, by the way, we do have 2 tons of polypropylene. They just say, well, folks, nice to know, but that's not our big business. Just put it somewhere in the corner. That's not our focus. So we have to work on this. Then the second question regarding recycling is, okay, why don't you use recycling plastic to produce new material, to produce new boxes out of old ones, to produce new plates out of old ones, which is a very valid question and a very valid requirement. Also here, I realize I'm always talking about problems and challenges when talking about sustainability in the lab, but let's face it, we have to face the reality. We are scientists, so we survive it. Recycling plastic is normally a mixture of different colors. When you look on all your shampoo bottles in the drugstore, they are all proudly stating, I'm made of 90% or 95% recycling material. Great. But if you look on the colors of these tubes and vessels, you realize they're all dark. It's all blue, silver, red, gray, black, because this mixture of recycled colors, recycled plastic colors, is ending up in a dark color. In the lab, we do have crystal clear tips and tubes because we want to see the samples. We need to see the samples. So that is limiting the amount of recycled plastic we can use, because we need to use crystal clear recycling plastic. That is, to be honest, it's an optical issue. We could survive it, but there's a far bigger issue regarding leachables. And that's what you see on the right side, these peaks there. Recycling plastic has a strong tendency to leach, so to provide little particles, chemical particles, from the plastic into your sample. And that's something which is not recommended, which is not good for your studies. The third point here on this list, the supply, that's one issue for suppliers like Eppendorf. So it's still difficult to get a constant flow of recycling plastic in the same quality and the same purity and the same quantity from suppliers. Because they just say, well, today I have this amount. Tomorrow there will be a different amount, and on Friday there will be, oh, there we don't have something for you. And that will not work if you have a continuous production with a high throughput rate in the factory. Actually, we were really interested to see that there was one supplier, a small supplier in the US, offering tubes made of 20% consumer recycling material. And we ordered them and just tested them because we were just curious to see, okay, did they manage where we failed so far? And what you can see on the right side, these microtubes were, well, in the graph you see there were spikes in the analysis, so that means they have also these leachables. Actually, when you open the plastic bag of these tubes, it was just like sniffing into a chemical industry factory. So there was something inside which did not belong to it. And then we did some centrifugation tests, and they cracked. You see them on the bottom, they all cracked, despite being within the specifications. So this is not a good example. And unfortunately, I mean, I really appreciate if other companies try something, but the problem is customers or users who are ordering these tubes, they will never, ever again try material from recycled sources because they just say, well, that doesn't work, it broke. Because if you have a bad experience, you don't, I mean, you're smart, you do not repeat this mistake. So from my perspective, we have to be sure as a supplier that these products which we produce, and we have to go, don't get me wrong, we have to produce tubes, tips, and plates in the near future from recycled material. They must fulfill the highest conditions, the highest expectations on your side regarding sterility, purity, stability, because otherwise it's just rubbish. And here you would need to repeat your experiment. So to cut it short, definitely we need to further strengthen on our activities here to develop material from recycled plastic, but that will take some time. In the meantime, we can check what else can we do. So there are options regarding biopolymers. That's what I would like to address now. So 4 years ago, we checked at Eppendorf, okay, what is the major impact, or are there several impacts, we don't know, on the production for plastic consumables? And for sure, it was not a real product lifecycle analysis at that time, that very moment, but we just checked the different steps in the production process and the handling process and assumed how much impact does it have. So for sure, the raw material, the fossil oil, has a big impact. The factory was pretty small. We were astonished because, I mean, actually, by using renewable energy, all the molding machines are driven by electricity, so therefore you already reduce your footprint. You need a little bit of gas, natural gas, to heat up something, some pressured air, which is, well, driven by electric power. And then you do the packaging. And, you know, we're a German company, so we had a lot of detailed questions about, like, oh, can we increase the rate of recycled paper in this cardboard box from 80 to 82%, or even 83%? When you look on this graph, you see it's a nice try, but it doesn't turn the needle. The packaging does not really have an impact. Transportation has an impact, and that's something where in this game where you folks come into play. So remember from our personal life, we order something at, well, perhaps even at Amazon, and then we forget, oh, bad luck, I just forgot something. I just order another one. And then 2 times the van of, I don't know, UPS, DHL, or even Amazon will stop by at your house and just give you 2 packages, although you could have ordered it in once. And the same is for the lab. I mean, I know it's sometimes difficult to make combined orders because you have different cost centers in the laboratories. You have different groups, different teams, different bosses. But where possible, try to combine the orders. So that means if you put your order at the SLS website, that you really say, okay, I now ask all my colleagues in the lab, does someone else need something from SLS before you put the press buy now button? Disposal is something where we have, due to the legal restrictions, not really a shape in it. So that's something where neither we can really improve in the moment. So the learning out of this one was, okay, let's focus on the raw material. And as mentioned, bio-based material, bio-based plastic, there are different versions. You can talk about the first, second, and third generation. And the first generation, some of you might remember, there were some discussions some years ago, like maize, corn, and sugar cane as a resource for car fuels. So car gas. There was a big discussion in the public, like, okay, should I drive my car or should someone else get something to eat? So from the ethical standpoint, first generation bio-based polymers are no-go because you're just competing with the food and the well-being of human beings. So where we said, okay, we have to focus on the second generation, which is based on waste. Waste, which is normally incinerated. So that's something where we have a very small, let's say, negative backpack on the footprint of this material. In the future, there will be these so-called third generations. That means algae will produce polymers or whatever structure to generate fuels and plastics. But that's still R&D work. So this second generation material is waste from the food industry. And it's pretty easy. You can just collect it, clean it up, and produce plastic out of that one without using fossil oil for this product. And you see here, I mean, it's the identical picture, but you also chemical, you could not differentiate between a bio-based and a classic fossil oil-based plastic ware. So you have the same performance, the same feeling, the same stability. It does not smell for French fries. It's really pure plastic. To make the story complete, there's a list of the ratios here. So you see it's not 100% all the time of bio-based because we depend on suppliers. And that means, as mentioned already in the beginning, polypropylene exists of different subversions, and all these plastic wares, they do have slightly different PP versions. That's what I learned as well, because as mentioned, I'm a biologist, not a plastic guy. So you have to look for different suppliers to get the very specific, very fitting material. So we talk about materials between 86 and 100% based on the mass balance approach. Sustainability is always related to a value which is called CO2 equivalence. So that is the currency, the global currency of the sustainability impact of a product, of an activity, of whatever. So CO2 equivalents are the measurement you will be asked for when you say, well, I have a far better and more sustainable product. And that's something where we also were asked for, like, okay, you now have these bio-based consumables. What is the CO2 input or impact for these products? First of all, I think I should just give you a little hands up regarding vocabs. So what do we have regarding carbon analysis? You see on the left side, there are so-called life cycle analysis, LCA. That's a big analysis where you check the carbon footprint, but also environmental impact over the complete process. The product carbon footprint, PCF, is the small brother or sister. It's just looking on the carbon emission of a product. And then on the right side, you see the life cycle. So starting with the raw material, transportation, factory, and the production in the factory, logistics, the usage in your lab, and then finally the disposal. And there we have two different options. We can say, well, we just look on the cradle to gate, which means from the raw material to the gate of the factory. So our gate here in Hamburg, where we produce the material, for example, or we look on cradle to grave, which means from really the cradle, the original raw material to the final grave of the product, means the disposal or recycling, whatever comes at the very end. So there are two different ways to look at it. 2 years ago, we started to ask an external agency, think, well, we do now have these famous 5 milliliter tubes made of bio-based material. Can you please calculate the carbon footprint? And how does it work? So we had to provide a lot of data to an external agency. They wrote a report, sent it to a third party, so an external validation of their report. And finally, we ended up with a 100-pager full of text and full of declarations, numbers, and figures. And honestly, I can tell you that's one of the most boring documents I ever read. So it's something like, well, 100 pages is very difficult. So that's what I would like to save you from. So just the results here, you see, for the 5 milliliter tube, we have currently, well, we still have 90% bio-based in the tube and 0% bio-based in the lid, because the lid is still polyethylene, and that's difficult to get a bio-based alternative. So we save 18% of CO2. Okay, is that now good or bad? Is it high, low? I have no clue. That's your opinion, I think. Honestly, we had the same feeling. So when we started this analysis, we dreamed about 50% or more of savings of CO2. The learning out of this is production of plastic requires carbon, period. That's just a matter of fact. As long as we stay with plastics, and we will stay with plastics, I think, for a long, long time, we will create and emit carbon dioxide. The study was also checking the, let's say, near future model of these tubes at Eppendorf and saying, okay, when you switch to completely 100% bio-based material, you can end up with 27% CO2 savings. Percentage is always, well, let's say, nice to know, but what does it mean in real? So we scaled it up to different other tubes and tips, which are also made of bio-based. And you see here, for the tubes, we vary between 3 and 11 gram for the different tube types, and 0.1 to 1 gram for the tips. Well, now all the folks in the group who are driving a fossil oil-driven car will just realize, well, that's not even sufficient to drive to the bakery on Sunday morning because I take 100 gram per kilometer. In other words, we are talking still about savings which are not saving the planet. That's a truth which is a little bit painful. On the other side, we can replace completely the fossil oil by already used material, which is good. So the learning out of the bio-based experiment on our side is it does help a little bit on carbon saving, but the far bigger impact is we are saving resources, fossil oil, which is limited, at least we all know that in the, let's say in Europe. Somewhere else they don't, but in Europe, we know it's limited. So that is the cause of why bio-based is just some kind of bridging technology. In the midterm, we have to go to the recycling. I think there's no way around that, and I think everyone should be aware of that. Regarding carbon footprint, there's another issue which you should keep in mind if you look on carbon data from companies. The question is, first of all, based on which norm and standard did they calculate this? And then, in the second step, did they include the biogenic carbon? What the heck is biogenic carbon? Biogenic carbon, to cut it short, that's those molecules of CO2 which the plants are using to do photosynthesis and to build up their own plant material. These plants are then used, or this oil of these plants is used for the bio-based plastic. If you incinerate the plastic, the bio-based plastic at the end, this built-in biogenic carbon is burned as well, and it's going back to atmosphere. So it's a ±0 calculation. But you can use it to, let's say, to optimize your results. How does it work? Well, when we look here on, those are some PCR plates, and don't look on the small figures on the left, but just focus on the two green surrounded areas. We have on the left column, we have this including the biogenic carbon. On the right, excluding the biogenic carbon. So you can see, including the biogenic carbon, we would save between 90 and 117 grams per plate of CO2. If we do it the right way, which is indeed the right on this corner side, you just end up with 6 to 28 or 29 grams of saving. So the biogenic factor is pumping up your numbers, but it's a 0-0 calculation because you bring in some carbon and you bring it back to atmosphere. And based on the standards, you should mention that in your report, into your calculations, but you're not allowed to show this one as your CO2 savings because that is just, well, we should call it cheating because that it just does not work. So you have to focus really on the complete life cycle. You have to do the calculation the right way. So to summarize it, we had some steps here in the last years to optimize the packaging, to introduce the bio-based material for plasticware, but also to start with real plastic recycled materials. So I mentioned, okay, plastic recycling is kind of joined by these leachables. So that's why we still do not offer any kind of recycling plastic-based tips, tubes, and plates, but we try to use it in the packaging material. So for example, in the lower box of the Eppendorf tip racks, to use really 100% plastic from recycled resources. The next step will be the lid and then the tray. And we have to go step by step to see how far we can go without having issues with the quality lady on your side. All these informations are nice to know, it's always nice to listen to someone, to a guy from a company, but is it really independent? Not really. And that's why we recommend you to also check independent sources, which means in our case to check MyGreenLab and the ACT label, because I think most of you already heard about that. Hopefully, it's a US-based NGO, and they are checking products for the lab environment regarding sustainability aspects. So they are checking exactly the process from the raw material towards disposal. It's a little bit like the European Nutri-Score card. You know, when you bought a washing machine or a TV or a freezer, you got all this information about water consumption, power consumption. I think you have similar stuff now in the UK as well. And that is very similar to this one. And the good thing is they even improved the ACT label. So all these data are available online. You can get them by the ACT database. So it's public. Everyone has access, and you can get all the information about these products and their sustainability footprint. Not the carbon footprint, but just the sustainability footprint. Carbon will come. And the last year, we spent a lot of time with ACT, so their team of MyGreenLab, as well as some other suppliers, to create ACT 2.0, which is an update of the existing ACT label. And that looks like the following. So it will also cover all these aspects of production, raw materials, usage, logistics, but also include information about a product carbon footprint, if that's already available, about how the factory is producing, how the company is already tracking. Remember the first slide I showed you with these confusing numbers. If the company like Eppendorf or like SLS or like Thermo or who you name it is doing their homework. And also this one will be then available in public on their website. So I highly recommend you to check that out, because that really gives you information. And we have nowadays, I think, more than 150 different product order numbers already related to the ACT label, and Eppendorf is currently updating everything, or at least it's myself, because it's my task to update all the ACT 1 labels to ACT 2 labels now, with a lot of additional data upload to MyGreenLab. So you see, whenever you have this little lab bottle here with the green leaves and the ACT logo, you know, okay, that is something which was checked by a third party. And with that one, I think we can make a short stop here. And I think, Sarah, if we still have time, we could just go to the power consumption and do the summary at the end, if that's fine with you.
Yeah, good with me.
I think we still have some time. Power consumption is the second most topic. So that means a lot of people are asking us, okay, what can I do, especially if they receive a power bill by the power supplier? How can I improve my power perception, my power consumption in the laboratory? Because, you know, whatever is shaking, heating, cooling consumes a lot of electricity. The big question is always, what is that instrument which consumes the most power in the laboratory? That's always a funny discussion, because most of the people just say, well, that's the bloody freezer, because that's running all over and it's consuming a lot of energy. I mentioned I was in charge of the freezers for some years. I have to defend them. They are not the worst ones. Not by far. It's at least the big centrifuges. So, I mean, I'm still missing the big shakers, but the big centrifuges, like this multi-purpose benchtop centrifuge, the 5910R, it consumes for 1 hour run 650 watts. If we increase from 15,000 G to nearly 20,000 G, it's 1 kilowatt per hour. Those of you who voted for the freezer are, if we're honest, are right as well, because the centrifuges just use 1 or 2 hours per day. The freezer is running 24/7. So in total, in absolute numbers, the freezer is the worst, the bad guy. But if we just look on power consumption per hour, they are not that bad. But we see different products require different energy. If we look on an incubator, I mean, with 40 watts per hour, that's just pretty much nothing compared to the big units. So what can I do to reduce this one? For the freezers, for sure, at least we know when you switch from -80 to -70, and more institutions are doing this and recommending this, that is for the Eppendorf CryoCube series, that saves you 30% of power. That was tested in our external test house, so the partner test house where we do all the testings. And 30%, I think, are a lot. For sure, you cannot switch all freezers to -70. There are a lot of discussions about how safe is it. I mean, for cells, you should not do this, but on the other side, cells, do not belong in -80 freezers. They belong in liquid nitrogen. So for all the buffers, water-based buffers, for DNA, and even if we're honest, even for RNA, the temperature doesn't matter. If your RNA is clean, it will not disappear at -70. But discuss that in your internal teams, because they are also SOPs where you cannot just change the temperatures right away. Then clean the freezers. Remove the ice, remove the snow first, then the ice from the gaskets, from the walls, from the side walls. Another point is keep the 10 or 15 centimeter space, ventilation space around the freezer. The compressor does not like it if it's too warm. It will survive it for some years, but it will work and work and work. It will consume more and more power. At some time point, the compressors will just die because they're overdone. Another point is, I remembered from my own times in the lab, we had 4 or 5 freezers in a very small room. It was like a sauna inside, which was stupid looking backwards. But you know, we also always bought the consumables, the lab consumables, in big bags. And there's always a lack of space in the lab. So you look on your freezer and realize, hey, there's a cubic meter of free space above the freezer. Just put the bags there, which is not a good idea either. Because then you're blocking all the ventilation, the warm air, which is going from the back of the freezer upwards. You block it. The warm air is going down again to the compressor, and the same stuff with like a lack of sufficient ventilation space happens. Last but not least, think about a inventory management system. So that helps you to keep the opening times of your freezers as short as possible. I think every one of you realized the student looking for 10 minutes, digging in the freezer, and you think, close this bloody door, it's warming up. The better you know where your sample is, the easier you find it, the easier you can close, the faster you can close the door. So next product group, centrifuges. For sure, we cannot reduce cooling for centrifugation because otherwise your samples are cooked. But just as an example, you can see here how much power a centrifuge with and without cooling, so 24 space unit is listed here, as they consume. So there is a significant increase of power consumption just for the compressor, for the cooling. But again, we have a lot of situations where you definitely need cooling. And it doesn't make sense to save the electricity just due to, let's say, green sustainability aspects, ignoring the economical sustainability aspects, because if your samples are damaged, you have to repeat the experiments, additional costs, additional time, additional nerves, because you have to explain it to your boss that you have to repeat the expensive experiment. So please always justify, okay, does it make sense to save energy, or do you really need the energy to do a proper job with your experiment? Then there's another question, could we just save some energy by using physical law? So you could just cut down the speed by half and double the running time. So instead of using the machine for 20 minutes at 20,000 G, you just go for 40 minutes at 10,000 G. If we look here at this graph, we see that for 20,000 G, we consume something like 130 watt hours for one run. If we cut half the speed, we end up with 95 watt hours, which is lower than the 130 watt hours. Perfect, or? No, not at all, because we have to double the power consumption, because we have to run it this double of the time. So we end up with 180 watt hours. If we cut down the speed by half. So that's not really a way to cheat and to save energy. It does not work. So for the centrifuges, we always recommend to use the small units. So not to buy the second small one, but really if you have several instruments, it's like if you have 2 cars at home, one small car and one big van, and you want to go to the bakery in the morning, not use the van, please. So the same as if you just have 2 little tubes, don't use the big boy, but just use a small microcentrifuge. Take the small, if you have a big centrifuge there, always take the smallest rotor you have, because the bigger the rotor, the heavier the weight, the more power consumption. Use the pre-cooling or fast temp function, independent from the model, from the supplier. It's not only limited to Eppendorf, but all the other guys have it as well. These programs have optimized condition for the pre-cooling. So please do not keep the machine running full speed at 4 degrees for half an hour just to cool it down. just use the fast temp pre-cooling function. That is totally fair enough. And if you know you use the centrifuge in half an hour again at 4 degrees, keep the lid shut because the lid is insulated, so it keeps the cold inside the rotor chamber. Not overnight, because the lid hinges, they do not like to be in a closed position for a long time, but during the day, it makes sense. Besides, if you keep the cool down centrifuge overnight closed, over the time you will get to have a nice smell in the morning because it's just getting humid inside, so it smells a bit like your fridge in the basement at home, but you didn't open for 3 months. Biosafety cabinets. Also, these guys are taking a lot of energy. So there's rule number 1 is close the sash whenever you don't need it. So there are, for example, a lot of American institutions who are now, so some grassroots movements who put little stickers on the side pillars of this biosafety cabinet to show the right position of the sash if you do not use the machine. Switch off the lights. I mean, that's easy. If you still have an old biosafety cabinet and you still have these classic bulbs, think about if they need to be replaced by using LED bulbs in the future. The UV light. I still remember in my own cell culture lab, all the technicians always told us, yes, you have to switch on the UV light in the evening and must run until the early morning. No, not at all. Because what's not dead after 20 minutes of UV light will survive even the night. Plus, the UV light is burning out. So if you do this for 3 months, 4 months, the UV light is just not working anymore in a proper way because it's getting weaker, but you still need the energy. Also remove whatever is in the cabinet. You see here, this lady in the background, there are already 3 boxes and 1 bottle that is already on the borderline. These fans are optimized for an empty cabinet. For sure, that's a theoretical approach, but still, the more you put in, if you have all your lab equipment in your cabinet, the fans have to run full speed, which means full power load, high power bill in the end. Also, the warm-up in the morning, it does not need to be half an hour or 1 hour. Modern systems, they are completely fine after 15 minutes latest. So again, saving energy. Cell incubators, so CO2 incubators, similar to the freezers, keep the door opening time at a very limited time. Check your seals, the gaskets. Think about the HEPA filters if you need it. Check out also gas consumption because there are differences between the models. Then water consumption. The autoclaves, for sure, don't mix up the waste load with the new stuff. But if you need to autoclave a box of tips and you just have one big autoclave, ask around if someone else has some additional material to be filled up in the autoclave. If you still have these water-based vacuum ejectors, they're just using tap water, pure drinking water, to create a vacuum. The water is just going down the drain. So then think about a little investment into a vacuum pump because they are just consuming electricity, which you get as a renewable source as well. Last point on this list are the ice machines. And the washing stations, pretty much every institution have 1 or 2 ice machines. They all look a little bit like, oh, that is not my home territory. I don't care, but it's wet, it's soaky, I just need the ice. But if we look on these ice machines, they are very poorly insulated. They use a lot of energy, a lot of water, and they just waste all these resources. So think about the reusable cold pads, which you get from different suppliers, which you can just put in the freezer. They're cooled down by electricity and not by water and not by, putting all the energy into the air. So that's the way to reduce your footprint. That's now the final end. So when we summarize it, we can really say, okay, we have to learn, we have to educate our own. Also at Eppendorf, we constantly learn and improve our knowledge about sustainability. I think the bio-based material is a way to go in the moment. For sure, as mentioned, in the mid-term, long-term perspective, we have to close the loop to make new stuff out of the old one. So to keep the material in the loop. The carbon footprint, I shared you some data about plasticware, and perhaps you wondered why is the guy not showing you some information about the centrifuge carbon footprint? Well, pretty easy. It's really challenging. So for the plasticware, you just have 1 or 2 or 3 materials plus some stickers, some packaging material, that's it. even that is already complex enough to calculate it. But if you imagine an instrument with hundreds of parts, you have to track back every single part to the supplier and check all that. And that will finally end up as a carbon footprint. That will come as well. So actually, there is a law in the European Union. So under 2030, we have to provide you folks the carbon footprint of all our products. I think it will be similar in the UK. So there is a lot of pressure on industry in the moment to adapt and to establish all these calculation methods for all the products. So we are on the journey. We still have a long trip ahead of us, but we are not at point zero. So we already made some progress altogether. I hope that this webinar provided you some new insights to improve your local situation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jan. That was great. That was really, really interesting. I definitely learned a lot. So we do have a few minutes left. If anyone has any questions, feel free to speak up or pop them in the chat.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you so much for that. That was really informative. I do have a question. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll start with if I was someone working in a lab, what would be the best thing that you would recommend to do, and if I wanted to be more sustainable in my day-to-day habits in the lab?
Yeah, that's a good question. So normally the people should self-reflect. I mean, we are trained scientists. We know logical thinking, rational thinking, and just to check what is the situation. And for sure, it would be perfect to have the final perfect solution right away, but that costs money, that costs agreements by the management that requires a lot of efforts. So you could just start with, as mentioned, what kind of plastics do you purchase? How do you handle plastic? Do you waste a lot of material or do you save it? Do you train your colleagues? Do you save resources like energy? So there are little things to start in the beginning, and then you can just proceed. And actually also my Green App does offer training sessions for free of charge. We can just have video clips and learnings and little tests to improve your own skills over the time. So highly recommended to do this.
We do have a question in the chat as well from Maggie. Maggie's asked, should we focus on producing plastic consumables that could be washed and reused many times like glass used to be, minus the weight and health and safety worries at times?
Yeah, washing plastic is a way if you use it for, let's say, non-challenging substances. Because when you really work on molecular biology approaches and you have a little contamination which you cannot remove by washing, you're in trouble, because then your results are potentially at risk or even destroyed. If you just know, okay, I always use this tip for transferring the same material, so some liquid buffer, some water-based buffer, and it's always the same. For sure, you could use the same tip for a couple of times, even washing them out. It really depends on the application.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to people that maybe want to make the right choice and choose more sustainable products, but maybe they've got a procurement department that are just focused on price and will always go for the cheapest option? How could they work around that?
Yeah, that's a really troublemaker, because I think most of us have to go to the procurement team to buy something. And most of the time, these guys have less experience with the lab conditions and just buy the cheapest one. And that's something which is really nasty, because it's blocking our work. And I think the first point for me would be really to check if my company or my institution has a green agenda. If so, my big boss on the top is interested to be well prepared to show everyone else that his or her institution does the first steps on green. So that means if you can show that your wish is helping them and upper management as well to be shiny in the green area, that may help them to see, yes, it makes sense to support this project. So try to take them into your project. They have to have a benefit as well. That makes a lot of difference.
Makes sense. A couple more questions in the chat. So what leachables did you find in the comparison between the Eppendorf tubes with the third-party products? It seems like there are peaks in both chromatograms. Yes.
good observation. Honestly, I'm not a total expert on the chemical analysis there. What I learned is that you have some materials where the leakage does not impact your samples, or where the leakage is. I mean, you cannot avoid the leakage completely. So you always have a little baseline of leakage, but in principle, the point is just you have to reduce it to a minimum. And I have to figure out what exactly this peak meant. So I don't know which substance it was, but it's something which we expected actually. So that was the same stuff we got in our own internal materials. So it was confirming our trouble pretty much.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, just to follow that up, somebody's asked, could you please give the link to the publications you had on leach at all?
Yeah, so there are a couple of different white papers and application notes on the Eppendorf website, and I think so Sarah will be happy to provide you that as well.
Yeah, we'll send a follow-up email to everybody that's attended today with all the slides and links to any white papers like that. A couple more questions quickly before we wrap up. So another one from Maggie, the current bio-based products are expensive. Do you think that the prices would go down with higher volumes?
Yeah, that's a good question. It always depends on with what you compare it. So for sure, if you buy, let's face it, a very, let's say, price-sensitive product from somewhere out of Europe, you have a different price, but also you have a different, let's say, environmental footprint of this product. The bio-based material, raw material, is far more expensive than oil, fossil oil, which is, well, it's bizarre because it's limited, the fossil oil, and we do not see it when we go with our car to the gas station, but recycled plastic or also this bio-based plastic is far more expensive. What we tried at Eppendorf to take over most of these additional costs. That is our chunk of this bill that we say, well, we want to support the users to go greener. So that means we do not transfer this price difference to you. We just have a very little fraction of this add-on on the list price. The rest is on the Eppendorf internal bill, where we say, well, that's our part of the story. But we have to improve the pricing, no question.
Mm-hmm. Good to know. How easy are filter tips to recycle? Should we encourage to be more selective in what tips we use?
In the moment, there's no way to recycle tips at all because they're contaminated. I mean, if you're 100% sure that they are clean, you could just put them into the polypropylene collection box. But again, the people in the recycling factories who do the sorting of this stuff, they just see your tip and there's no little tag on it saying, I'm clean. So for them, it's lab waste. So for them, it's like, oh, we do have a problem because there is contaminated lab waste. So that makes it so challenging, so difficult to recommend. Oh, you can just, if you're sure about the cleanness of your plasticware, you could just put it into the plastic recycling bin. Well, the point is these guys at the recycling company, they are trained on looking on the troublemakers. And for them, any kind of lab or hospital stuff, which looks like coming from a lab, is a troublemaker. That means they have to evacuate not the complete area, but the complete waste stream there, saying, okay, this is now all contaminated, we have to remove it, put it to incineration. And that makes it so difficult.
And then maybe a final question. So what is the future of bio-based? How can we ensure we have enough feedstocks for these products? And just to add to that, is there any work taking place to consider a different feedstock than cooking oil?
Yeah, well, you should constantly go to McDonald's and Burger King. No, I'm just kidding. There are tons of this material still. For sure, there is a growing interest also by the car industry, the plane industry, like, oh, there's a perfect way to replace fossil oil in the fuel industry. But in the moment, there is a lot of material available. Most of this is currently incinerated as fuel.
Great. Okay, unless anyone has any other questions, I think that's probably time to wrap it up. Bang on 2 o'clock. Thank you very much, Jan, for that. That was really informative. And yeah, just to confirm, we'll send a follow-up email with the recording, links to the slides, and any other white papers we think you might find interesting. So thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. So I think we have to close the call officially now.